Welcome. Hello, Canadian film lovers. Hi. Hi to everybody out there. And for anyone who's new to First Weekend Club, we promote Canadian feature films. So, rightly so, today I'd like to introduce our guests. It's the creative team behind Parallel Minds. We've got the writer, producer, director, Benjamin Ross Hayden.
Hello there, Anna-Lea. It's so great to be here with you virtually. We're close. We're getting closer.
Yeah. And then Shannon Chappell, we have visiting us as well. He's in his prop room, I believe. Is that right?
Yeah, in my prop room. Yeah, prop display room.
Awesome. Okay, well, let's get right into it. And if anybody has questions out there, please, we will be looking them over and seeing if we can fit them in and ask our creative team about what you have on your mind. So, Benjamin, what was how did you envision the worlds that you created in Parallel Minds? How did that come to you?
So, well, about the topic itself, Parallel Minds, it's a rabbit hole, and it's the journey that I wanted the characters to take. You know, since creating the story, I mean, I looked at the topic technological determinism, where we're heading, you know, from a human perspective into a future where we're dealing with things like artificial intelligence, and where our perspectives and our experiences and what we share with the world, it's being replicated, packaged, transacted, and yet at the same time, from a Métis Indigenous perspective, which many of my films, that's where they all start, that's where they all originate. Also, it's very important to look at traditional knowledge and compare the two in that respect. So I look at the spirit. You know, the spirit is also like AI. It's something that's invisible. We can't see it, but it's all around us. And you know, the human spirit is very different than the spirit that's being made out of zeros and ones, that's in our devices and our computers connecting us like we are connected right now. And so when it comes to the human spirit, I wanted to explore that and the connection between it across time, between Margot and her guardian, Kukum. And it's that connection that I have with my ancestors too, that I think is important to explore, this connection across time. And it's something that AI doesn't really have. It can try to have a sense of intelligence, but there's a lot of things that I think AI can't and shouldn't have access to. So when it comes to a story like this, it has to do with the contact lens of the future that may come about, or already in the past has been sort of presented, but it's really about the ethics of what these tools of the future are, and that not all of them are what meets the eye. So in that respect, I think that as a sci-fi topic, it's one that needs to be revisited in today's world now.
And how did the project come to you, Shannon?
Ben and I had worked a little while on a few movies beforehand, and we're both here in Calgary. I kind of just made this ridiculous costume to show off what I could do, and Ben had seen it in the newspaper, and he came straight to the venue I was at and said, "You've got to start doing movies." And he twisted my arm a little, and it changed my life ever since. So I turned it into my full-time career since meeting Ben. And then he came up with this great idea, and Ben's always pushing the limits and pushing what I think I can do. So yeah, I think we're a great team. We have the same vision, and yeah, very few disagreements. We just are on the same page on pretty much everything.
So not a lot of conflict, or?
No, we get along great when it comes to doing this. Ben, I like doing things that are push my limits, like I said, that are kind of out there, or yeah, basically those kind of things. And Ben gives me those opportunities where I don't get them in a lot of other places.
So what from your background influenced the art direction on this film, on Parallel Minds?
For this one, I would say Jade's warehouse. So I'm a kind of a hacker. I collect a lot of junk like Jade does. I hack it and redesign it. So pretty much everything in the movie was stuff that I'd already had in my possession, just things I've collected over the years. And I just take it apart, put it back together in interesting kind of ways. And even the laboratory was very much that. It was a lot of piecing other old things that I'd taken apart and trying to make them look kind of new. So I'd say that was the biggest challenge because I'm definitely analog in how I build things, and I like old technology. I restore old electronics and old radios and things like that. So definitely more of a Jade character, but the laboratory and as well definitely pushed my limits on what I thought I could do, uh, and it turned out quite well as far as we're all concerned.
And what are the indigenous elements? Do you have experience with that? Like, how do you come at that?
Sorry, could you say that first part again? It broke
Oh,
up.
the indigenous elements of the design.
I've been learning about that basically since meeting Ben. Like I said, a lot of my beginning was just hacking electronics things. So that's where I kind of got started. And then Ben kind of introduced me to these ideas. And again, it pushed what I thought I could do and kind of got me thinking outside of the box, the digital box or the electronics box I was in. So since then, we've actually done quite a bit of really cool things.
So what I'm thinking of specifically, like I'm interested in your collaborative process. Like for instance, that really cool design with the rocks it's a round circle and then it has that grid in the middle. How do you guys come to collaborate and how do you decide things? Like how do you work together? What's your process?
I think visually and also dramatically, cinematically is where the visuals and the design fuse with this indigenous futurist story. What you're talking about is the medicine wheel. The medicine wheel is important and significant. Often from that perspective, you have to look at having indigenous elements in there, not just because you can put them there, but they have to mean something. They have to be relevant and purposeful. And in this case, it has a lot to do with the backstory of Margot Elson and her ancestor. They built a medicine wheel in their field, and so the medicine wheel is a traditional, it's a traditional figure and symbol that means different things to different nations. So in the case of her and the Métis, it comes in the form of a calling and a chant that where Margot repeats, "I chant for a wheel that turns and repeats, it will protect and show me the way." So that in a way, it also harkens to the connection between her and her ancestors throughout the film, and also the connection that they have where they're bound across time spiritually, which is what I was mentioning earlier to you. So in that respect, we take those kinds of things into consideration when we look at even how the laboratory, the high-tech laboratory, was built in a circular fashion. Many of the sets, we wanted them to have all of a circular kind of feeling and vibe. It's subtle, and if you really have to look and consider it. But from the perspective of cinema, these are design elements that we all have jotted down in our original blueprints and floor plans that Shannon and I put together when it came to designing and arranging the different sets that were built.
Shannon, do you sketch stuff out? And then how do you come at things? Like, what's your process?
I come at this kind of as a found object artist. So a lot of what I do is almost like Lego. I kind of will dump a bunch of things out on a table and then I'll put them together, and then two things might just land next to each other and it looks interesting. And then from that, I'll just develop a whole idea. So a lot of my ideas grow organically, and that's kind of fine for me. But whenever I'm trying to communicate with the set construction or something like that, we will sketch out some items. And like this show in particular, we were really interested in spatial distortions, like not having a perfectly square room, having sharp corners, just to kind of add to that uneasiness, especially when you're in places like Tower.
Yeah, I know in design elements, it's usually more expensive to make round things because it's harder and it's easier to cut angles. Did that impact how did you work with that creatively?
We use a lot of CNC for most round elements. So I would say in the laboratory, the center machine, that was all pieced together from old desks and things like that. And again, it was almost like Lego. I just kept piecing things together in interesting ways till you really didn't notice the individual elements. You kind of seen it as a totality, but it was a fair bit of laser cutting and CNCing to do those kind of things.
What's CNCing? I haven't heard that before.
CNC would be like a drill bit on a drill, except it's on a machine and you plot it in. So you would send your drawing to the computer and then you would say, make me a circle. And then it would just keep going around and around until it cut through the material. So it uses a drill bit to cut to the material, where a laser would just use the laser to burn through the material. So it's a removing process basically.
Very
So
cool.
yeah, a lot
Kind
of
of
that.
like an older analog version of a 3D printer, but on a really large scale.
Wow.
Just making
Yeah,
Very
3D
cool.
is additive and CNC is a removing process. You're cutting away material.
I see, almost like sculpting in a way.
You can do 3D as well. So if you set the program up right, you could make 3D shapes as well, where you just kept cutting down at certain levels, and it can do that as well. But for what we had done there, most of it was just cutting out wall panels or cutting out shapes. When you're using found objects, you kind of have to cut a shape that they'll fit into, so they're just not kind of sitting loose in space. You still have to build a structure around your found objects.
And also, when it comes to making the sets, not just the cutting, but also, in creating the different environments for the film and the different sets, we needed to take into account, like, okay, so what's the nature of this room? Is this room like a refrigerator room? Is it a kind of a high-tech waiting room where there's these interesting panels, and giving a new sense of purpose to a room and an environment that's slightly near future, maybe 15 years from now. So Shannon and I, in our conversations, him and I are always brainstorming and scheming, like, what's the purpose of these environments? What does it do? What can take place in this scene, in this set? This isn't something where him and I sit down a month before production. I usually find I really love to go out to locations really early on, just to kind of get to know them a bit more and get to know the environment and explore them the way the characters do. And also when it comes to actually if you have to make the sets, then also having a conversation well in advance so that, you can give yourself time to actually create these environments. I think that's where our process really stands differently artistically for what's going on in this region of the world, that is.
How would you just find your look your aesthetic that you're creating, or how would you describe it?
Right. Well, I think aesthetically, I always really like to approach each film and each story in binary contrast to the one that happened just before it and the one that will come after it, just so that it's an opportunity to explore a completely different world than you previously have. So, aesthetically, when you look at a first film that Shannon and I did together, The Northlander, that was entirely nomadic, outdoor, post-human. We were creating all these organic structures. We had to build a village, and we came up with these very creative ways of constructing shelters and huts using I think it was like construction plastic with spray foam and spray paint and sticks, and making it look very like handmade and hand formed. And whereas in Parallel Minds, everything was sharp, cut, laser cut, arranged, geometrics. And also the third feature film that we just wrapped last summer, which is coming out next year, The First Encounter, that was also a totally different experience because we were working in a 90s period environment where there's a lot of like rustic farmhouse locations. Everything was already there, but then we needed to do these really elaborate things, like go to find a big area with sand dunes and build a really large alien looking structure coming out of the sand dunes, or construct an entire cave in a warehouse using all kinds of materials and spray foam. So building a cave was also an experience Shannon and I had last summer working together, which was pretty incredible.
Wow. Shannon, would you say that there's like something that guides you to express the emotion of the setting that you want to create? Like, is there some intuition that drives you, or?
It has a lot to do with shapes and colors. So generally before I build anything, I'll think of a color, and I kind of use that color as my foundation. Because I find when things are going off the rails, you can always come back to that color, and it's kind of a thing to reground you. So the cyan of the laboratory was kind of the first thing that I had thought of was that color, and then some of the reds of the other rooms. So again, the feeling was portrayed a lot in color and a little bit in spatial distortions as well. So no square corners in a room, basically those sharp corners. Yeah, and a lot of it was just kind of expressed through colors. I think maybe Jade's Warehouse, maybe a little more was more of myself in there. So just the lighting, low lighting, I work kind of in those low lighting, and I find it more cozy basically. But for me, it was cozy for me just being surrounded in a bunch of old junky electronics. So I don't know, part of myself I would say is most in Jade's Warehouse.
And what about the almost like the parallel world of where her home, when she goes back home, and that whole universe, and even the dreamscapes? Like, can you maybe fill us in on a little bit of that? It's such a parallel universe in a way, or completely
yeah,
different.
I mean, that's kind of the point of it is to establish these different environments where you look at what an environment like an old rustic homestead means, and what kinds of things happen there, what kinds of experiences take place in those worlds, and those dreams, those memories you have of those places when you were young, versus these cold, functional, artificial, very environments of the future that you know, every one of these locations has this very specific function and purpose, and it only is a lobby, and you're going to be greeted by one person, and you better have one reason to be there. Or the case of the chamber that houses the artificial intelligence. So we don't see this for the entire film until the very last scene. It's this reveal where we go into this environment where we're talking like, what would it take to refrigerate an artificial entity that is the epicenter of all of these memories and digital experiences that are, you know, gathered from us, from our social media, from our lives on display? Where is the epicenter? What does that look like? It was also what we wanted to create cinematically, because a lot of times you can have it talked about in a film, and for all intents and purposes that's okay, but in showing it, in going there and seeing it at the very end of the line was important for this film, because it really hits the message home that, you know, you have to really question, where do all of these experiences of social media of our lives, where do they go, and what's being done with them, and what does it look like, that thing at the very end of the line. So Shannon and I mean, we talked about it, and because it's an antagonistic force, you know, there has to be all kinds of different things and colors and a lot of shadow, obviously, that really has to do with it. But what I think is really interesting, also the cinematographer Jeff Mayer had a part to play in this too, was how we used like really stark contrast, where the room was so painted so dark and so dense that it felt really heavy, and then we also had this penetrating light kind of shining through at different places that really represented the volume or the quantity of what data, like human data, really feels like when it's being plugged into this being called Yeah.
Actually, I did want to, we're not doing any spoilers here, but there is a creature, and I was going to ask how you collaborated on sort of the look of that creature and how you went about creating that.
I think, well, for Shannon and I's collaboration on it, it had to do with him being plugged into the room. He had to physically be plugged in somewhere. So it was figuring out how to construct this set that would actually have him be plugged into this apparatus, as well, giving like conversations about this liquid that he lives inside. And so we are getting into some spoiler territory here, but you know what, it's exciting territory, so we might as well jump in.
Well, we don't have to give spoilers, but just maybe like, yeah, some Shannon, like, how did you make, what was your, like, how did you create, what was your piece in creating this creature?
Well, besides the designing of the room, I think our first conversation was this pool of black liquid. Kind of everything else that we did grew out of that pool. And so initially we had quite a few discussions about what Erm should look like. Should he be just like a blob that was kind of in a human form, and what would he want to show himself as? So it kind of grew there. It grew from there, and then as far as the design of the room, then we started thinking, well, he's a supercomputer, so how would the room be set up? Should he have his own server towers in there that operate him, or does he function solely out of his pool? So yeah, the ideas kind of grew from there, and I can't explain too much because it keeps turning into a spoiler every time I think further ahead, but
just know that something lurks out there.
yeah.
Did you have a part in the special effects as well?
No,
Or?
it was more just the design of the room, the construction of his pool. That was kind of where my involvement ended.
I have a question. What is the difference between a set designer and an art director? Or is there?
It depends a lot on the movie, actually. So on indie movies, those two roles, a lot of time, they'll just get kind of combined together. And this is kind of the special work relationship Ben and I have, is that I do a lot of stuff. So I'll, like on this show, I'll do the props, I'll design the sets, and I'll basically build everything. I'll do all the electronics, but it's just because I'm one of those people that can do all those things. So you don't generally get people a lot like me. So especially on union movies, they're very specific. You have to stick to your department and do your thing. But Ben and I, we collaborate so well together that it just, a lot of times it's easier and it makes more sense just to have me doing even the costumes. So I just end up doing a lot of the art stuff. So Ben and I kind of keep that really close connection to each other. We keep that kind of really under a tight umbrella when it comes to those things.
I find that, sorry to interrupt, Shannon. I find that when you have like a confident relationship and a shorthand with an artistic collaborator, you see it with Quentin Tarantino working with the same people over and over again. Same thing with, Alejandro Inarritu, he'll work with the same cinematographer over and over again. Those are the kinds of relationships where, your shorthand, you can tackle different projects and different story worlds together and do it from an understanding of a knowledge that you've already built on to that point. And yes, there's going to be people who will come in also in addition. It's not just two people doing everything. These people are going to, get the lumber, get the walls, actually put it together, hammer and screws. But when it comes to like the really tight vision of we're talking like color palettes, we're talking how dark or light do the walls need to be, or artistically, if you're building a set, what kinds of design elements are in that set. And it's the I guess it's the respect that two artists will have with each other, where they won't deviate from those understandings and those conversations that they have. And they'll, in the case of Shannon, make sure that what we talked about ends up really happening, instead of I talk about it with someone and things get changed in translation. And then as a director, I show up on the day and there's no hoses in the walls, everything's bare. There's one chair in the middle, one table, and they said, well, this is the best we could do. So, it just comes down to those, that trust in the relationship.
I think trust is probably the most important thing, because Ben knows I'm as dedicated as he is to that movie. And he knows, like he said, he's not going to come into a room and just see a chair sitting in the middle and nothing else. He knows that I'm going to get exactly what we done, and probably even more. So, and I know Ben trusts me, so it also helps me as well. It kind of encourages me to go even more.
Yeah, that's really cool that you guys have established that. So basically you've worked on 3 features together, is that correct?
Yeah.
So, and I guess you plan to work in the future too together, I'm assuming.
Yeah, well, yeah, I was Shannon. I was location scouting for Ice Talker a few days ago. I was out in the Rockies, kind of, and then I'm looking through Banff and Jasper National Park, and they have permits and everything, and so again, it's a brand new environment. This is all new. It's another fourth feature film that's in development with Canada Media Fund, and the entire film is set in the Rocky Mountain snow-covered wilderness in the far future. And so again, when it's far future, you're looking at things like mostly costumes and maybe vehicles. So usually when it comes to film aesthetics, you have to kind of choose which baskets to put your eggs, because you have the budget that you have, and you work artistically, but also with what would you call it? Judiciously or carefully, I guess.
You're very efficient with your resources.
Yeah, both of us can squeeze out a lot with a very little, for sure.
Do you find that those restrictions actually increase your creativity?
For myself personally,
Shannon?
yes. Yeah, for me it does. Yeah. Sometimes you can buy your way out of problems, but when you buy your way out, a lot of times you're just stuck with what you bought. But when you've got to problem solve and all you've got is a bunch of, say, a garbage can or something, and you just start digging through that, and your creative mind just goes into hyperdrive, basically trying to figure out what's the best way. And sometimes some of the best stuff I've made just came from a lack of resources. So personally myself, and again, it puts you under pressure. I like the pressure as well. So I think I do a little better under having that kind of pressure put on me. So for myself, yes, I do. I enjoy working on low budget or medium budget movies for that reason, just because it pushes me and makes me try a little harder.
And same for you, or?
Yeah, I think so too. When it came to to use the example, we're looking at scouting in the Rocky Mountains for Ice Talker, and the Parks Canada, of course, charges every day the size of your crew. You have to send them your script. It's really it's ornery. It's very, very detailed, and yet I took these roads and these routes that were just along the edge of Kananaskis and the Rockies, where you're still in mountains. You still see them in the background. There's lakes in front of you, and you're all right there, but you're not in the national park. And so your budget, is saved right there. Same thing with the film we both shot and did last summer. Was we were scouting South Africa for early on, and we were looking at a South Africa Canada co-production, and we were very close to doing it. But when we really started crunching the numbers and realizing how expensive it was to do such an undertaking, with flying a lot of Indigenous Canadian actors over to South Africa, we found that if we really challenged ourselves and really looked hard enough, we would find the same kind of environments in Canada. And sure enough, we did. In Winnipeg, we found sand dunes right outside the city. I won't say where, but there certainly was, and they were vast, and they looked almost, certain ones, they were about the height of the Sahara mountain dunes too. So if you challenge yourself, same thing, there's no cave. So we built a cave, and it probably would have cost the same. And so that was a pretty incredible undertaking to build that. But at the end of the day, it still saved on costs. So I agree with Shannon. You just have to really look hard enough and challenge yourself, and you'll make magic.
I was going to ask, when folks go and see your film, what do you hope they come away with in terms of the feeling, or
well, in the case of Parallel Minds, this film, especially today, has an important message built into it that I think is relevant now. I think we're in a time where we're allowing devices and technology to really come closer to us and have a part to play in what we say and what we do and how we interact with each other. And in my travels, I've really noticed that there is a lot of curiosity and even concern all around the world where I've been talking to people, having conversations, and a lot of people don't really know what's to come or how to reason their relationship with these devices, these phones or laptops, and how they present themselves on the internet. And so, you know, it has me question and asking us to take that position where, you know, we have these qualities as in a human spirit kind of way. What of our human freedoms and our minds are we really giving too much of ourselves into these devices? And they weren't like that in the past. That's why in this film there's a really strong contrast with the house on the hill that represents the time that these things weren't really a factor, and now they are. And so I care that somewhere out there a young person might see this film or film like this and rethink letting social media control their lives and make them depressed. Or I care that many people I talk to, you know, have the same concern about Apple or Google or big tech listening and watching, affecting or manipulating us and our lives. And so this is a call to attention that there's a wide-reaching consensus about what these devices are. And I care that what was set out to do in making the film was achieved, and that the film, you know, it's making great trails in I think about 17 festivals now by my count around the world, which is it's good that the film is really taking on a life of its own.
That's awesome. And let's give folks an idea of where they can see the film, because it's currently out in the cinema and it's available by streaming, correct?
Yep. So in Canada, the film is releasing theatrically in 16 cities across Canada. It started its theatrical circuit and it's still continuing. So it's sold out at Calgary. It's playing in Toronto, Hamilton, Nanaimo, Surrey, Vancouver, Saskatoon, Regina. And so the cities where people can still catch it is coming up in Edmonton, Kelowna, Whistler, and Hamilton, as well as Revelstoke, Vancouver, if I didn't already say it. And so those are some cities where people can watch it in theaters still on the big screen, and it always opens up on Friday. So people can go to manifold.pictures to get a full release schedule of when it's releasing in your city. And for people who want to also watch it on VOD, it'll be available on APTN Primetime and Hollywood Suite for cable in mid-December, and also on all the VOD platforms like TELUS, Bell, Shaw, and Amazon Prime right now.
Yeah, and on First Weekend Club, we have all the info that we're keeping it up to date, so you can see where Parallel Minds is playing and all the Canadian feature films that are currently playing or coming soon. So I wanted to thank you both for joining us. And yeah, it's a great conversation, and we look forward to your next film.
Thanks. Great talking with you too, Anna-Lea. Really appreciate it. Thanks, First Weekend Club. You guys are great. Thanks.
Thanks.